the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Hey folks, as you just seen, the video is going to be focused this week on the dark side, as you just saw Yoda give his infamous speech from the Phantom Menace to the young Anakin who's before the council. He talks about how fear and hate lead to the dark side, so we're going to be talking about the dark side this week. The Force itself is neither good nor evil. It's how you kind of harness the Force using it with your character. It'll determine whether it's light or dark. Force users and non-Force users can call upon the dark side at any time during the game to gain a Force point. So first we're going to go over that in detail, and then we're going to go over a little bit of how the dark side of the Force works with Force powers itself. Because the later half is a little bit simple and pretty much self-explanatory, but this part is a part most people don't know about. So from the companion rules, which I'm looking at right now, we got a picture of Luke there with the lightsaber ready to swipe. When a character calls upon the dark side, for the first time, he must make a perception or a control, if they have it, player choice, and must be the difficulty of 6. And each time going forward, the number is increased by 3, the difficulty. If what you're doing when calling on the dark side does not appeal to the dark side, such as harming another being or some type of selfish act or evil act, the check is increased by 10 points. So, say you want to do something and the dark side's like, meh, that's not really, conducive to what evil and the dark side is all about, the difficulty check is going to go up by 10. So if it's the first time and say you're doing something that's kind of iffy dark side-ish, but you want to use the dark side force, it becomes a 16 for the difficulty force. Calling on the dark side itself is a free action and resolved first and foremost before any other actions the character takes inside of their character action. Characters, now this is important, characters who do not believe in the Force or submit to the existence may not call upon the dark side whatsoever. In that case, those type of characters, the Force point itself is basically considered a luck or, a helping hand, but it's not the Force because they don't believe in it. So they still get the mechanic, but they just believe it being something different. And that's something you have to sit down and consider how to write it up with you and your GM, because maybe you don't believe in the Force. So you have to figure out a backstory why you don't and why you would actually have ability to have that Force point. So successful rolling, I should say you get over that difficulty of 6 when calling upon the Force, you automatically can get a Force point for that. So you don't have a Force point, you wanted one, and screw it, you need to do something really drastic. Boom, you're going to call on the Force, you're going to roll, you get it, you get that Force point, awesome, but unfortunately you get a dark side point along with it because you're using the dark side of the Force. Should you fail at passing the difficulty number, you gain no Force point nor neither a dark side point. And for story reasons, one could say the will was not strong enough to be considered by the dark side, thus no point granted. Really, however you want to describe it in your story-wise, that's how it would work. After each session, though, or adventure, depending on how your GM wants to handle it, the difficulty number does resort back to 6. This is supposed to represent the lore of the dark side, that if you harness it, it becomes difficult to control and use while you're using it. That's the rising number, going up by 3 each time. But while you stay for a while, it kind of lures you back. Like, hey, the dark side's like kind of like that guy giving you candy. Hey, you want that candy, fatty. Yes, I'm fat, I could say that. But, how you want to go back to that candy. So in the normal core book, it does go over the same thing here listed in the companion rules, but it also talks about what most people are more interested in, the dark side and using the Force. Now, if we go to the core book and we go to page 70, which is right here, we only get a small blurb pretty much saying, when a character with a dark side point uses the Force skill, his skill code is increased by 1 die per dark side point. Example, Jimbo, that's a great name. Control skill is 4D and he has 2 dark side points. When he uses his control skill, he rolls 60. Why is this so? because it is easier to harness the dark side of the Force than the light. The dark side is easier and more seductive path. There is always temptation to take it and a risk of abandoning the light. Really, that's about as far as they go in using it. Now, I would think, as a GM, if you're using your Force powers and you want to use those 2 points, and it's a very alarming, oh, I'm gonna get a 6 instead of a 4, I would think after a certain amount of time the GMs may assign you a Force point, a dark side point, because you're constantly harnessing the dark side to use these skills, and maybe at some point your Force power goes out of control and does something that you don't want. But I do have to say that a GM must always warn a player before attempting anything that might result in a dark side point. Flat out saying something like, I highly advise against that, you might get a dark side point, is really a good example of how you can say it. It always allows the player to pull back the action or proceed. The player has the option there at that point. So if you're going to attack someone and it's clearly an evil act, you, as a GM, would say, yeah, that's going to really get you a dark side point. And it's up to the player at that point to be like, do I want that dark side point or do I not? Don't make it a hem and haw thing. Just tell them, do you want it or you're not? No. Action is canceled. You think of another way to go. Time kind of reverses itself. But it has to be the player's choice. It can't be the GM's choice. And you have to warn a player. The book is very clear on that. You have to warn a player. You don't have to repeatedly warn them. You don't have to go into detail. You can just say, that's going to warrant a dark side point. Now, the companion rules versus the 1E core rules talk about when a character has a certain amount of dark side points, what happens. So every time you earn a dark side point, the GM rolls a d6. The core rulebook as itself, the one we're looking at right now, this one right here, tells us that the GM must roll that number. The GM must roll under that number for you to succumb to the dark side. If he rolls any other number, you're fine. So that's why a lot of times you'll hear people say the first one's free when you're playing this edition of Star Wars. Now, when you get to the companion book, which does update to almost pretty much 2E rules, 1.5 rules, it goes over by saying that it is equal to or less than that number. So the first one is no longer free if you're using this rule or the 2E companion rule, or actually companion rule or 2E rules going forward. You have to get that number, so you roll a d6. So say I have one dark side point. As soon as I get it, the GM rolls, and he rolls a 1. If I'm just using this book, I'm fine. I can get out of there. Not a problem. But if I'm using the companion rules, then I'm screwed if that GM rolls anything, pretty much. But I should say if he rolls the 1, I'm screwed. But other than that, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're fine. So that is how that works. Depending on what set of rules you want to use, if you're using just the core rules, you're fine. You get to roll underneath a number. Otherwise, it's equal to or underneath that number with the companion rules. So that's how that works. Now, how do we get rid of that dark side point? Say we get the dark side point. Well, we get rid of it through atonement, through fasting, deep meditation. If you flip to page 70 here in the book, 68 here in the book, it tells you deep meditation, a ritual, a character may shed himself of the stain of darkness. The process is long and rigorous. The character may continue to play while he's attempting to atone, but he must consciously be purer than pure. Doing anything that is even arguably wrong prevents the atonement. As a general rule of thumb, if during a session of play the player makes a point of telling you he's attempting to atone, clearly worries about doing the right thing, and pays strict and close attention to doing the right thing, then he's attempting to atone. If he acts like nothing happened, he's not. If the player acts like this for 5 sessions total of play, mentioning he attempts to atone every one and clearly avoids wrongful acts, his dark side point total goes down by 1. If the character acts in a questionable manner or even one expedition, he must start all over again. So think about that. You have 5 sessions you have to do this and clearly act accordingly. But say you go boom, 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 fourth, all of a sudden questionable act. That brings you right back to number 1 over here. So, how you want to do this, you can obviously change this, and what you could do is instead of like, yeah, my guy's going to atone and I'm acting cool and quiet in the background and trying to really right the wrongs, you can actually send a character out on an adventure to prove himself. Maybe he has to rescue somebody, or maybe he has to go obtain some trial. Maybe use the gym will bring up some trials that he has to go through, and he has to, make a decision in one, save his life or someone else's life in another. Maybe he has to find something and maybe tell the truth. There are some certain things you have to do in the Jedi Code to be a Jedi, and I think reading it over and making an adventure on that, besides having a player atone by just saying, hey, I just do this or that, and be cool the entire adventure for 5 sessions, I think an adventure roped around the Jedi Code and having the player character learn the actual Jedi Code and have to live it was a better way to atone than actually just saying, I just do that. Okay, so the final thing I wanted to talk about was that in the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, I think his name is, he this book right here, source book, this does have a certain creature in here that a lot of people do forget about. Is Ysalamiri, and I believe that's how it's pronounced. I've heard it pronounced as Solamari, but it really depends. I actually went to YouTube and looked this up, and actually went to Timothy Zahn himself. There's an actual pronunciation from him, and these creatures look like these lizard-like creatures, and they're able to create bubbles in which the force cannot be manipulated. A single one can form a bubble up to 10 meters in radius. Within the bubble, characters cannot use force skills, force points, or character points. Force attacks directed directly at the Sumari fade away and enter the creature's force bubble. Now, it's also said that a couple of them together can actually form larger force bubbles, and that's how Thrawn was using it in the Thrawn trilogy books, which would have been an excellent series for Disney to have made, but they made it Legends as opposed to canon, which is disappointing because it was such a good read of series. I cannot say that enough. But he used them in there, and also the Ysalamiri also have this ability that they need to constantly feed on trees. So he concocted this type of harness that he had on his back, so he can keep the creature fed and happy and being able to live. So their stats are listed in the Thrawn trilogy source book, so you want to use them. And they have a dexterity of basically +2. They have no die in dexterity. Their perception is 1d +1. Their strength is 0 +2. And the special ability is force repulsion, which basically, it's a bubble. No force can be manipulated in there. There's no if, no ands, or buts. That's just how it is. That's how the source book was. That's how the book was read, or the novel, I should say, was read. So you could use these creatures in your campaign if you could find them, and if you could figure out a way to extract them off these little trees, because they dig their claws into these trees, and removing them from the trees the wrong way will instantly kill them, according to the legends about these. It looks like they do have a canon here for them. Nope, there's no canon for them, but this is Wikipedia I'm looking at, so I'm not sure about that. But anyway, there's some things to think about for the dark side of the Force. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. How do you handle the dark side of the Force in your games? And let me know all about that. I'd be interested to hear. Leave a comment below. Don't forget to like this video, because it's very important. That helps the YouTube algorithms. Comment if you'd like to comment, but if it's your first time here, hit that subscribe button and hit that bell notification also, so when you get a new video from me, you can personalize it, or you can just get every new video from me, which would be even better. So with that said, keep it original, keep it old school, and good night, everybody.